So my name is Wes Davenport, Dr. Wes Davenport, yes. I have, it says my credentials, so my undergraduate degree in psychology, my master's degree in clinical psych, my Ph.D. in industrial organizational psychology from University of Tennessee. And I'm currently a professor of management over in the business school here at UNA. And yeah, that's my current position.
Hi, my name is Madison Holmes. I am a BCBA, that stands for Board Certified Behavior Analyst. My undergraduate, I was a double major here at UNA in psychology and public communications. My master's was in behavior analysis. I did that through Arizona State. And I am currently the BCBA for Lauderdale County School System.
Hi everyone, I am Dr. Sweetwood. I am a board certified behavior analyst over Group Reduced Behavior Therapy and Consulting. I've got my undergraduate degree here at UNA in psychology, and I had a minor in family studies. I got my Ph.D. in school psychology from the University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg, and ended up back here.
Hello, I am Jarrod. I did my bachelor's in psychology here at the University of North Alabama. After that, I also worked at Bridges Behavioral Therapy, and then after that, went to I currently attend Eastern Kentucky University, and I have my master's in clinical psychology. I'm currently working. I'm in year 3 out of 5 of my doctorate in clinical psychology, and yeah.
Hi, my name is Dr. Andrea. I did my undergraduate work in psychology and sociology, and then my master's and PhD are both in sociology, and I currently serve as an associate professor of sociology here at UNA and the executive director of the Mitchell-West Center for Social Inclusion and the Center for Women's Studies. And in 2019, I thought, well, like all those degrees are not enough. And so I am finishing up a master's degree here at UNA in clinical mental health counseling. And so I see clients at Health Connect here in Florence.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Virginia Scott Adams. I am the Director of Forensic Mental Health Services for the Alabama Department of Mental Health. My degree, even though I've worked in forensics for some time, my degree is actually in school and community psychology. I got my undergrad degree from a state school in Pennsylvania, Shippensburg University, as a psychology student, and I got my doctorate degree in psychology from Hofstra University, which is on Long Island in New York. I'll explain how I got here later, but that's later on.
We'll just start right down there and let it work this way. Yeah. If you guys will just tell me a little bit about how you got into your graduate education, how you figured out where you were going to go to grad school.
That's a tough question. So when I was looking at graduate programs, I started to visit programs my sophomore year of college because I knew I wanted to obtain a doctoral degree, but I didn't know much about psychology or how to get a doctorate because my parents were not able to go to college. So I started to go visit campuses and look for a program that was going to be a good fit for me as far as geographically and regionally, as well as training. So one of the pieces that I had to figure out was, do I want a PhD or do I want a Psy.D, and what the difference is between the two? And ultimately, where I landed was the Psy.D at Hofstra because A, I'm a New Yorker, so that was going home for me. And B, there was a lot of hands-on training that I was able to obtain. I learned early on that full-time research was not something I would be interested in. And so Psy.D programs allowed me to do 2 years of internship and 2 years of practicum training so that I could better understand where I wanted to end up on my career path.
So I actually didn't even know anything about graduate school. So I had a professor in undergraduate that had suggested that I go to graduate school, and I'm a first generation college graduate, and my response was, you mean there's something else that I gotta do after this? So I really didn't know what the process was. I was in Oklahoma, and I was really interested at that time in cultural anthropology, so I applied to University of Tulsa and was accepted, to then find out that private school tuition is a lot more than regional public institutions. And I thought, whoa, I can't do this and I can't afford this. And so I started looking at other options, which then took me to the University of South Alabama. And I learned through that process that not all schools have rolling admission, some in a cohort at the beginning of the year. And those were things that I just wasn't really familiar with. And so I had to learn a lot of that along the way. And then when I went to my PhD program, what really determined that was the assistantship, the funding that I got to be able to attend that program. I was looking at that and University of Kentucky and University of Delaware, and the funding really determined that. My degree now will be from UNA, and so again, the current context of where I'm at, the ability to attend that program has had a big say so, and I'm looking at a potential EDS degree and looking at online programs for that. And so graduate school has changed a lot for me, and the options have changed, but so much of it was really based upon what fit with my life at that time.
So for me, when I attended college in my bachelor's, when I started that, I knew first I wanted to be a physical therapist, and I learned that I'm not good at anatomy, don't understand it, couldn't do it. And then I wanted to be a psychologist. That's all I knew. Didn't understand so much the difference, like, you know, you were talking about earlier, the difference between a Ph.D. and a Psy.D, right? And when I looked into that, I also hated research, absolutely hated it. And I will tell you, if you think you're going to get out of research, decide you're not. Pretty much the best advice I've heard for a Psy.D. versus a Ph.D. is PhDs they're producers of research. Psy.Ds were consumers of it, and we use it for clinical practice. I do a bunch of research. I've done it myself. I've conducted meta-analyses, but everything I do in research, you know, I'm like I said, I'm year 3 out of 5 working on my doctorate, and everything that I do is for the function of clinical practice. A lot of PhD is for academia, and so there's a big difference there. I will say, if you're interested in doing a Psy.D, the closest place you're going to get is Kentucky. You know, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. You know, but it's close. You know, in Kentucky, with a Psy.D, it's more with the clinical function of practicing. And so I began there. I wanted to do that. I didn't want to do so much of the producing of research. I wanted to practice, you know, and a lot of the Psy.D is based on a medical school model of practicing. And so I knew that's where I wanted to start. So I started building my resume early on for the Psy.D function, the clinical practice. And I feel like a lot of the questions later, I don't want to get into it, but I think I'll be able to talk more on it later, but I think the best thing I can say at this point is I began by knowing the difference between a PhD and a Psy.D.
Well, I kind of had a different experience. When I was an undergrad, I got a good bit of practice doing research, specifically single case design research. And that was something that I knew I wanted to continue to do. So I applied for a master's program in ABA. I got an offer to be to join the PhD program in school psychology at USM, and that gave me the opportunity to continue to conduct single case design research specifically, but I also developed like clinical skills, and so now in my role at Bridges, I'm continuing those clinical skills, but I still have the desire to do applied research. But a little bit of background is I always wanted to work with individuals with disabilities. I really didn't know how I could make an impact, but I knew through conducting research, I could figure out some answers to some questions that I have, what would be some effective interventions, what works for them. And so that's how I ended up here.
Okay, so psychology was really, it fulfilled the need to have higher level courses through public communications. And then it turned out that I was obsessed with it. However, I came in late in the game and all these other students were doing research and I was like, I am not smart enough for this. So this was actually not my first choice, but it was my fullest desire. I felt more purposed in it, but didn't think that I could do it. So after I graduated, I ended up in real estate for 2 years and realized that it wasn't going to cut it for me. And I was 24 at the time, and I had to figure out how I was going to A, pay for school, and B, not move away from here because I was not going to be able to pay to go somewhere to school and afford to live at the same time. So I ended up going into my graduate program based upon just what could I afford and what would be the easiest for me to stay here and complete my supervision, because at the time it was 1,500 hours. And if you aren't aware, that is nearly a full-time job for 12 months. So that is how I ended up choosing the direction that I went.
All right, last but least. Well, I'll start with, so when I graduated from high school, I chose to go to Auburn University for my undergrad. Not because I got any scholarship money, because I didn't, not because they had my major, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went there because my girlfriend was going there. And ironically, they let me teach decision making here at UNA. So I tell that story. That's like about the worst way you can make a decision before you go to college. Now it turns out that I ended up marrying that woman later, and we had kids and we're still married, but I also tell people that just because the outcome works out doesn't mean the decision is a good decision. So don't confuse outcomes and decisions. That's another topic. So anyway, I started at Auburn. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I was undecided, and I stayed undecided for a long time. And then my junior year, still undecided, taking core classes and trying not to waste classes on things I didn't know what I wanted to do. I took a social psych class with Dr. Jeff Facto, and that clicked for me. I just really loved it. And it was, I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but I knew I loved it and it made sense. And I remember telling my dad I was going to major in psychology, and it looks like I like, I don't know. So then I figured out that in my senior year, like, well, I think I can go to grad school. That seems like a good idea. So didn't really know anything about that either. And I applied to a bunch of Ph.D. programs, clinical programs. And I don't remember what the acceptance rate was at the time, but it was really bad. I don't think it still is. It used to be really bad. And I don't remember how many I applied to. I think I blocked that from my memory, but it was like 15 programs. I didn't get any. I got interviews at several, and there was one interview I got, and this story has a point. So there was an interview I got at South Florida in Tampa, and I guess I was Beyonce, and they offered engagement on my girlfriend, whatever. I told her, I was like, I don't think I want to go to this interview. I said, I don't think I want to live in Tampa. I was like, I don't think we want to live in Tampa. So I was like, do we really want to go to this? And she's like, no, you should really go. You should never know. You should go, which was good advice. So I went to the interview, and they didn't let me in. So spoiler. But I did meet somebody at the airport after the interview who had also interviewed that same weekend at USF. And she had done her master's at ECU in North Carolina. She said, hey, if it doesn't work out, you want to go to master's, like I know some faculty there, they're great, you'd love it. And I said, okay. So I sent an email, and long story short, it worked out, and they kind of paid for my education to go to ECU. It was late in the game, but because I knew this person. So I got in, I did my master's in clinical psych at East Carolina. Never been to ECU or Greenville. I got in my car and just drove and found it and went to school there for 2 years, and did my master's in clinical. And then, like I said, later on, I ended up doing a PhD in organization, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, just kind of crazy pathways. And so I know this isn't supposed to be like I don't give advice session, but I would say one thing to always think about, and relationships matter. They really matter, and you just never know where those relationships are going to come from. So anytime you have an opportunity to form those relationships, it's worth it, because you just don't know what's going to happen. So that trip to South Florida, it changed a lot of things. And I never went to Tampa to school, but the trip ended up being meaningful, so I just throw that out there. I guess I get to go again.
Yeah, you'll go finish the session. And guys, if you have to leave or anything, that's fine. We're actually gonna recording the session and we're gonna post this afterwards. So if you guys need to walk in or anything, that's fine. We'll let you know that. And we'll move on into like the next subset of questions, which is what certain requirements do you feel like someone would need to be able to do your current job?
Okay, so currently, like I said, I'm a professor of management and business school here at UMA. What requirements would you need? Well, if you want a tenure track position, you generally need a terminal degree, so either a PhD or equivalent. I don't know. I mean, in order to get the job I got here at UNA, I had taught at a business school at a previous institution. I can talk more about that later too. So I had a little bit of background. I had published some, so publishing matters if you want to get a job. If you're published, that's the currency of academia in a lot of ways. So if you want to get a job, publishing helps. And then I guess I would just say, like, in terms of other requirements, I don't know. I mean, they'll tell you things that I can tell them dirty secrets here. They'll tell you teaching matters, and it should. Like, I love teaching, it's what I do, but it's very difficult to assess teaching. Like, it's harder to measure, and we don't do a very good job of it a lot of times. So I would say being a good teacher really matters if you want a job in academia. Unfortunately, there are some people that are better teachers than others, but I think that matters, especially if you want to be meaningful in what you do, right? Because that's kind of why I do academia. I do it for the research, I do it for teaching. That's more my passion.
Okay, so obviously you have to take a board certification in order to do that. In order to be a BCBA, you have to, before that, have a master's in a relevant field. And it used to be 1,500 hours supervision, and now it's between 1,500 and 2,000. Correct me if I'm wrong here. But whereas I do not work in a clinic, I work within the school system. I'm hired by the school system. I have more influence that way. Also have benefits, those are very nice. But I would say that special ed, understanding of special education and how the state works with that, how special ed teachers are required to write IEPs. That's something that I gained from my internship, which was with Florence City Schools. I served them for free for 12 months and very grateful for that. But I learned everything that I know about special education through that internship.
So I'm not going to repeat what Madison just said, but I got my PhD in school psychology, so I'm going to kind of speak a little bit on that. So the requirements for getting your PhD in school psych, or even like clinical psych or counseling psychology, it is like completing 4 years of coursework. Sometimes it's extended further, so 5 years, 6 years, just whenever you can complete those requirements. And then what I had to do is I had to complete a 2,000 hour or 1 year APA approved pre-doctoral internship. And that is just so I can apply to be a licensed psychologist. I mean, ultimately that's my goal. I just really have to take an exam in the near future past that and become licensed, but there are some additional requirements beyond just like completing that coursework. So that's something I would look into. Like if you are looking at becoming a licensed psychologist, make sure that the program you're looking into provides those opportunities for you. But I just happened to join a program that also had the BCBA approved course sequence, so I was able to earn the hours, and then I was able to take my exam when I completed school.
So with me not being a licensed psychologist yet, I want to touch on the beginning of my career, or the path of it, because I think there's a couple of things. I know there's a bunch of students here today. And I think this would be something helpful for you all to take if you're thinking about doing the doctoral route, if you're thinking, you may not be smart enough for it. When I attended UNA, I had a very unimpressive GPA. I remember it was a 3.27. I graduated with that, right? didn't do a lot of research. I don't know if Dr. Carrasco's here today, but she's the one. I do want to give her props. I was supposed to work at the VA today, but I got off for this, so thank you, Dr. Carrasco. But you know, my senior year, I begged her, I annoyed her, you know, frustrated her probably, to do research with me, because I said I wouldn't be a psychologist. And I remember the first thing she said to me, you know, she's, if you know Dr. Carrasco, she's a little hardcore, right? And she was like, you could be a better life coach. And I was like, maybe I would. And she's like, you won't ever make it as a psychologist with that mindset. And so I went home, and my parents were sitting right here, and mother's right there. And I went home, and I was mad. You know, and I cried a bit. And I was like, you won't believe what Dr. Carrasco told me. She said I'd make a better life coach. And I was like, well, you need to tell her different. And so I walked in and I said, I don't want to be a life coach. I want to be a psychologist. It's just that's attitude. She's, but that 3.27, we're gonna have to get it up, Captain. And we did, and so I did research with her, and I did a bunch, but I had a 3.27 when I graduated with a bachelor's of psychology at UNA. I applied to all the grad schools that I wanted to go to, and I didn't get in my first year. And after that, you know, I went and worked for a whole year, and I worked at Bridges, you know, great place to work. But the thing was, I think there's a bit of a misconception on how to be a psychologist. And I think that what that is you think you've got to have just these stellar grades, you've got to have all these like one, you know, there's like a linear model to be a psychologist, right? And it's not, because if it was like, I'm going to be one and somebody needs to take my credentials away, right? But I couldn't find a place to work with a bachelor's in psychology. And going back to my mother, she said, well, print out your resume, your curriculum vitae, so to speak. And I walked around and just handed it to places. I just handed it to places, and I think I had up to like 10. I don't know, it was a bunch. And there's one place that I handed it out to, and I handed it before I could even, you know, they said, you want to interview tomorrow? I don't like kids. Don't like them at all. I don't want them yet. You know, maybe I do, but I don't like kids. But it was Bridges behavior. I handed them my resume, and they said, how about Monday? And I was like, oh, I love Mondays. I hate Mondays, right? and I went there, and Dr. Burton, we were talking earlier about what a gem she is, and I worked my butt off, you know, and it's not so much the grades, it's more like it's networking, it's you don't have to be a stellar student to do it. It's good to have good grades, but like don't count yourself out. And so I handed out my resume, got a job, and then I got in my second year, I applied. And I'm in year 3 out of 5. So unless they do something to me like after this speech, you know, I think I'm good, right? But as far as how certain requirements, I currently, you know, I'm in my year 3 out of 5. I'm not a psychologist yet. I currently work at Cincinnati, Ohio. In Cincinnati, Ohio, I'm a psychological intern at their Veterans Affairs Hospital. What I do is we reintegrate veterans who have seen combat and war, and we reintegrate them into society. The kind of disorders we treat are pretty severe, they're pretty cool. It's schizophrenia, schizoaffective, schizotypal. We do some borderline bipolar. So a lot of the weird stuff we love it, but the credentials you need for that, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. It's experience. It's just getting out there, getting that experience. It's not so much grades, it's just the experience. Yeah.
So I'm not going to talk about faculty positions since Dr. Davenport did that. The work that I do here on campus, though, in terms of social inclusion, you know, you do have to have a passion for these topics. You got to develop your cultural humility. You got to develop public speaking skills and group facilitation skills. Building relationships is always important, and networking. So that's what I do there. In terms of my clinical work, with the clinical mental health degree here at UNA, it's a 60-credit master's program. Y'all, that is a lot of credits. That's like doing another PhD basically. And 750 practicum and internship hours. And so that comes out of, again, building those relationships. And so the work that I do now with Health Connect, work with our Veterans Court program. I work with in-home services through DHR, so families that need some assistance in reunification. And so one of the things that I have found that's really helpful for that kind of work is, again, understanding how these different organizations function and building those relationships with people. And so again, the networking and the relationships are really key to that. And so when you graduate with a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling, you have a master's degree, then you got to take your exams and you become an ALC, and then you have 3,000 hours of supervision before you become an LPC. And so my trajectory in that is a little bit different, and then I'm trying to work full time and do that degree, and then thinking about how do I integrate that into the work that I'm already doing, which I don't know how that's going to happen with all the things that I'm doing. But it is a long trajectory, and it's a long road for folks, and that pathway may not necessarily always be seamless. People take breaks and they come back in and things like that.
Okay, so my career took a very interesting journey. So I started out in the school system. I had to complete, in order to earn the doctoral, the program that I went to, I had to complete 2 years of practicum and 2 years of an internship. And it was an APA accredited program. So it seems like a lot at first, because I did have to work when I was in school. So I had some graduate assistantships to earn money, and I participated in research, which was really fun. I mean, I did everything, gave blood, whatever, any way to get money to pay for my schooling. And so when I started my practicum in the school district, I had a fabulous opportunity. I had excellent supervisors, clinical supervisors, but I found it really boring after 3 months because, you know, it's testing, you're going to IEP meetings, maybe doing some behavior management plans. Friends of mine who were in the program loved it. I liked it, but that really wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my career. And so I actually learned about juvenile justice when I was working in the schools, and started to do some work outside of my internship over in programs for juvenile delinquents. And so after completing that work, I was able to obtain a practicum with them and started to get into the juvenile justice family court type work. And then from there, I had an opportunity to spearhead a grant to help students who were prone to delinquency, who needed to go to our local psych hospital, transition back to the community and back to schools. And so that was a paid experience, but based on my relationships, as someone mentioned, with the local hospital, I was actually able to start moving into the clinical realm. So it was kind of an interesting path that I took that was a lot different than other students in my program, but it worked for me. And so as a result of that, I had 2 years of internship experience, both in hospital settings. One was in a private hospital, one was in a state operated hospital. And through that work, I was actually able to take a class with the law school, where I learned about mediation and court testimony and family court, and that was very, very valuable to me. So based on that, I stayed within the clinical realm and focused much of my career of working with youth. I actually moved down here for a period of time after graduate school to work at Bryce Hospital in Tuscaloosa, and left and went back to New York, where I was actually an assistant deputy to our commissioner. So I was in a higher level political position. Did not like that at all, would not recommend that. And so now I am the director of forensic services for the Department of Mental Health. In order to do the job that I do, it requires several different skill sets. So one is the political training I got in New York has helped me in this position, because we're frequently dealing with elected officials. And Alabama is a very diverse state politically. you have, it doesn't really feel that way, but it is. So you have judges in certain counties who have very different views and perspectives on people with mental health issues than judges and elected officials in other counties. And so really trying to navigate that is important. The other piece to my position is being a licensed psychologist. So I supervise a lot of doctoral level students as well as psychologists working in our hospitals. And so in order to do that, I do have to be licensed. Being licensed, the requirements are different in every state, but there are some similarities. One is you will need to have a period of time in which you are supervised clinically after you graduate and after you complete your internship. So in Alabama, I did that for a year, and Alabama actually provided that to me at no cost. In some cases, you have to pay for your supervision that you need towards licensure. So think about that when you're looking at your career path. You're also going to need to have internship experience to get licensed, and my recommendation is that if you go to graduate school, you look for an APA accredited program if you want to be a psychologist. It is possible to be licensed without graduating from an APA accredited program, but then there's a in-depth review of all of your coursework, what the requirements were, reviewing your syllabi, all of that, which is just it's an added layer of work. And then, of course, you have to pass the licensing exam, which it's a lot. You have to study and be prepared for it. But you can take some courses in that and then do practice tests and work your way through that. So the licensure is really important. The other piece to my position is you're only as good as the court will let you be. So when we are providing testimony, it's up to the court to determine whether or not you can be sworn in as an expert. So the court will ask you what your training and what your credentials are and how long you've been working in your area. It's critical to remain within your scope of practice and to make sure that you are seeking opportunities for ongoing education and training even after you graduate. Because if you're going to be in the forensic realm, they're going to ask you questions about all of that training, all of your certification, how many years you've been practicing. Some will ask how many various types of evaluations have you done, how many mental state at the time of the offense evaluations have you done, how many competencies stand trial. I went off here. So it's really critical that you make sure that you keep track of that and that you stay up to date in your area.
That might go out maybe.
I think it did. Is it working? Okay, it's working. I'm everybody hears me everywhere I go.
So we're standing in the oldest building on campus. We have the free of the technology occasionally. If you guys want to just give us a ballpark, not we all see dollar signs, but I'm sure maybe the students here don't really know all about your specialties and your focuses. So if you could tell us what, is there levels to salary increases, what they can expect to make when they start, as they finish, if there's different careers within that field that offer more or less.
Well, that's a really good question. So if you work for the state, you could always work somewhere else and make more money, and just to be honest with you about that. Obviously, if you're a licensed psychologist and you can practice independently, your salary will be commensurate. One thing that I would recommend is if you decide you're not wanting to go down the doctorate in psychology route, I always recommend that if you're going to work in mental health, get into an area where you can get licensed, whether that be a licensed clinical social worker, licensed mental health counselor. For the Department of Mental Health, our positions that are licensed pay more. And I know sometimes our master's level psychologists become frustrated because they may be making, they have the same degree of experience, same workload, et cetera, but they don't have a way to become licensed. And so I would recommend going the license route. It also allows you to be able to hang up a shingle and practice independently if you want to. What was the other part of your question? The different levels. So yeah, that's a really good question about the salary. So I didn't get into the position because I wanted to strike it big. But my family structure has resulted in my husband needing to stay at home to care for our son. And so I have been the person working in my household since my son was born 14 years ago. So I do worry about money because, well, I have to float all the family bills in the house and all that. Administration definitely pays you more. And so, one of the pieces to my career was I love being a psychologist. I absolutely love doing psychology work. I love doing testing, diagnostics, therapy, all of it. But I found that if I would have stayed a psychologist, my salary would have maxed out at a certain point and I could make more money if I went into administration. The psychologist that I have will tell you that there's a lot more headaches to that. It requires a lot more time, right? So our psychologists can come in at 8, they can leave at 4:30, they get an hour lunch break every day. I haven't had an hour lunch break in years and I don't always leave at 4:30. But yes, you know, your administrative positions, if you can get experience in administration, program development, program implementation, management administration, your salary could go up accordingly.
So for tenure track faculty, there are built-in times of promotion where you do get pay increases, and so those are pretty standard what that looks like. But the starting salary can vary depending on you know, the university that you're at, the kind of university, the college that you're in, your field. So that does really vary. For the work that I do in counseling, so clinical mental health counselors that are in community mental health get paid pretty poorly. And that's just kind of how it is. And that's actually probably the area that I will be in is community mental health, because I really do have a passion for making sure that communities have access to mental health. And so our community mental health providers, like in this area or Riverbend, and then you have agencies which function as kind of similar to community mental health. And so as somebody who's going to be starting out as an ALC that I have to practice under supervision, I'm really limited on what I can do. I can accept Medicaid, but I can't see clients that have Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And so once you get your LPC, you do get a pay increase, but then if you're working at an agency versus a larger practice or in private practice, all of that is really dependent upon where you practice at. The work that I do, because I already have pre-existing relationships with DHR and the court system, there's opportunities to be a part of grants where you get contracted services or even contract directly with DHR. And that kind of cuts out the middle agency person and you're working directly with that agency. So again, it's hard to put an exact number on that. And it can vary really depending on what line of work you go into in mental health and then you know, what area you're in.
So as far as a student that's studying clinical psychology at the doctorate level, you know, as far as the job field and what it gets paid, I'm not familiar in the sense of a psychologist, but what I can tell you, where I'm at, after you get your master's, you're going to be looking at what internship looks like. And if your, you know, your internship ideally is a place that can offer you a job after that. And so I can give you perspective on the Veterans Affairs Hospital. So so with me being in Kentucky, I think, you know, I've been on Indeed before. And so I know a licensed clinical psychologist in Kentucky, I think it starts out at $90,000 a year. And that's just what Indeed says. But as far as, you know, in like what I'm doing, so I think, you know, for internship, you have to start looking like in your third year for where you're going to go, because you got to plan ahead. And most VA, so your internship, you're pretty much working for close to free, but so you're going to get a, you know, and so, but your internship year, you're going to get a stipend. So I think it was the Huntsville VA for a clinical psychologist, if you were to go to that hospital, I think it's a $35,000 stipend, 33 to 35, and that's for your internship year. But in the state of Kentucky, I know after your internship year, you're going to start at $9,000 a year as a Veterans Affairs psychologist with government benefits. And I'm not sure with Alabama what the VA is going to pay you after internship year, but I can give you insight on the internship process. You're going to get a stipend of about $33,000 to $35,000 like your internship here. That's just really my take on the pay, so I don't know.
I can add to you about the state. So for state psychologists, on average, ours make around $90,000 a year. It might start a little bit lower depending on your status when you come in, whether or not you're licensed or not. But, you know, especially if it's an area like forensics where it's such a specific field and it's hard for them to find us as forensic psychologists. You know, you start out at, I think it's 80, maybe 82, something like that, and then you get a 4% increase based on your performance. So if you have a strong performance review, which exceeds standards, you'll receive a 4% increase every year, and it levels at about 80 or 90,000. Our director of psychology at Taylor Hardin, I think, makes 100 or 109 or somewhere in that range. So if you're looking for a band, but you can go on the VA's website and it's all public information what people are making. So you can definitely find that out if it's a public employer.
Okay, I'm gonna give y'all in all areas of my life what I've experienced as far as salary goes. So when I was in graduate school, the program I was a part of, we had external assistantship. So I wasn't necessarily employed by like the University of Southern Mississippi. We just had like our professors went out and got us individual contracts, whether it's through local public school districts or privately owned clinics. So I will say like the stipend that I received in graduate school, or not just me, but like all the individuals within my program, it ranged between about like $15,000 a year to $25,000 a year. It just really depended on your experience. Some of the individuals in my program came in with their BCBA, so obviously they were a little bit more marketable as far as that stipend went. And then looking at my pre-doctoral internship, a lot of the positions that I interviewed for, and then also, it's honestly public information when you look at the site. It pretty much says the range that they're going to offer. I would say like, depending on the geography, it would change, but it like ranged to, it was probably up to about $35,000 a year was probably one of the higher end salaries. And they usually started at around $20,000 a year, and that's working 40 hours a week off that salary. And then looking at just being a licensed school psychologist in the state of Alabama, you're looking at, you know, the average salary probably being about $65,000 a year, around that. And then as far as being like a licensed psychologist, that goes up a good bit. And we've already gone over what that salary range is. And then for being a board certified behavior analyst, I would, it really depends, but I'm in the South, so I'm just gonna kind of talk about the individuals that I know that are board certified behavior analysts in private practice, probably start off around like $65,000 to $75,000 a year mark. Of course, that can go up depending on your experience and what else you're able to do in addition to just your ABA work, and then and RBT. So the area of ABA, you have registered behavior technicians and then BCBAs. A registered behavior technician is something that you can do without. You can honestly do it in undergraduate, so any of y'all in this room would probably be eligible to, you know, take that test, pass it, and then start making money. I would say those salaries are pretty good. I would say it's probably comparable to like a pharmacy technician salary, so you're paid hourly from my experience. But I would say, yeah, probably about 15 starting out, and that can go up depending on whether or not you're going to continue in the field of ABA. So if you're looking at getting your master's, the company that you're working for might pay you more. This is an incentive to continue to work for them. So I would say that would be a really good place to start getting experience, and then you're also like financially supported as well. Okay,
So I am hired through the school system, so it's different than a clinically based BCBA. Whereas they're getting paid through insurance or private pay, which is an hourly rate, or it just depends on what insurance pays. Because we're in the state of Alabama and it's so rare for a BCBA to be hired through a school system, I would say there are maybe 20, maybe 15 school systems that have BCBAs hired on staff. There's not a pay scale. So it's public knowledge, you can look it up. Some school systems have adopted a pay scale for behavior analysts within their school districts. Madison City, I think, has in Madison County, and then there are a couple others. And they pay very, very well. However, currently I'm on teacher pay scale. So for the masters, it's $49,000 a year. But luckily, because they've passed a couple of laws with pay increase, there could be pay scales that are set out by the state that would increase pay substantially. But for now, we wake up every day for influence and not for money.
I know we're running short on time, so I'm not going to talk a whole lot. I will just mention some of my background, like some of my degrees, industrial organizational psychology. Is anybody IO interested in here? One in the back. Okay, so if you're interested in that stuff, talk to me and I can give you details about different pay. But I will just kind of throw this out to you. So, you know, I teach in the business school, so I'm kind of a unicorn over there. I identify as a psychologist, even to my dean, so he knows. But I will say there are some fundamental differences when you're talking about pay scales for academia and also versus consulting, like a lot of IO folks end up in consulting. And I've done some of that, but that's a different set of pay scale. You make a lot more money. You also travel a lot. It's just a different world. So you have to decide if that's what you want to do. But within the teaching side of it, you know, if you think about colleges, I kind of break it down like you got R1s, like your Alabama, your Auburn, or whatever. Then you've got kind of more regional schools, with which you would fall that pot. And then on the private side, you've got what I would call like IB and IBS, which are kind of name brand private schools. And you've got the other private schools. And each of those has kind of a different tier in terms of pay scale, like they pay very differently. So you kind of have to think about what kind of lifestyle you want, and where you want to live, and all kinds of things, how much research you want to do. And then if you do academia, there's obviously, as I talked about earlier, there's the kind of professor or tenure track, whatever. And then there's administration if you want to sink into those waters, which I've done a little bit, so you can do that. There's obviously some financial gain if you want to do that. And then there's things like overload, summer pay, other things that can help your compensation if you're academic. So those are all things you want to consider if you're thinking about that. And I'm happy to have those conversations if you want to find me afterwards.
All right, great answers, guys. I know we're running a little bit on time, but I promise we're not going to shut the doors and like not let you out or keep you out. However, I was going to open the floor to you guys. If you have any individual questions, it can be for the whole panel next, or it can be just like for one if you have a focus in one area. Anybody have any questions they want to ask? Wow, okay, okay. Oh, okay, there's one here. Go ahead.
This one's for Jarrod. I heard you talking to Dr. Bates earlier about the therapy you're doing with BA and suicide prevention and all this stuff. Tell us more about that.
Suicide prevention. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so suicide has, since I started my clinical journey, so to speak, something I've been passionate about. I started doing research with it my first year. I started my doctorate. What we essentially do, so research shows, we used to have, they would do suicide contracts, right? They'd be like, hey, promise me you won't kill yourself. Doesn't work. People kill themselves anyways. What we do is CAMS therapy. It's what I'm trained in. Research shows it's one of the most effective ways to treat suicide. And CAMS stands for Collaborative Assessment and Management of Suicide. And so it's an outpatient form of, so pretty much our goal is to keep you out of the hospital, because research shows that if someone talks about wanting to kill themselves and you put them in a hospital, the only thing the hospital changes is when they get out, they don't want to go back to the hospital. And they usually end up killing themselves. And so our form of therapy is to do that on an outpatient basis. And at the VA, suicide treatment at the VA, it's and I know you hear me speak about it like freely, like very colloquially. It's because at the VA it is. It's you know, you get like I don't know the exact statistics on it, but it's a lot of suicidal thoughts in the VA, and so you've got to be candid about it. You've got to be upfront, and you know, it's one of those things that the biggest problem when it comes to suicide in America, anywhere, is not talked about enough. And so what I do and what we do at the VA and anywhere in the clinical realm is we address it up front, and we're really because I mean, you know, if you broke your leg right now, we wouldn't beat around the bush about it, you know. So we like to do the same with suicide. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
I was just wondering what type of therapies that, and because I'm a retired soldier and I go to the VA also, but one thing I want to do is help other veterans, law enforcement, that type of stuff with trauma-based therapies eventually. And that's why I was wondering what type of therapies are you working with that are most cutting edge? Suicide prevention, other type of stuff, PTSD, you name it.
Well, so I know I mentioned earlier, with trauma, a good one is dialectical behavioral therapy. DBT, I actually conducted a meta-analysis like with that my second year. And I compared the effects of dialectical behavioral therapy against other effective trauma therapies. And what it showed was dialectical behavioral therapy is an effective therapy for different types of trauma, whether it's sexual, physical, emotional, whatever, what have you. The reason being is dialectical behavioral therapy, there's like a lot of different skills that's taught with it, whether it's empowerment, whether it's distress tolerance. So to answer your question, I personally prefer when I treat trauma, I treat a lot of trauma, and I personally prefer dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be good too.
All right, anybody else have any questions? Okay, just to let our panelists review the room. So raise your hand if you're a psychology major. I thought that might be the case. Anybody a minor in psychology? All right, the Lone Ranger. All right, so raise your hands if you guys are wanting to into the clinical aspect, clinical psychology counseling, I think. All right, and then how many of you were interested in the like the business psychology, the IO stuff? Okay, and then anybody looking into like the forensic side, that kind of thing? Okay, and then how about the behavioral analyst stuff? All right, and then let's not forget Dr. Hunt. You might be interested in what she does, which is social inclusion, community health, that kind of thing. All right. That's a good question. It was open education major. Anybody here interested in education, majoring, minoring? I guess not. All right, guys. Okay. If you guys are cool with it, we're good there. If you guys want to mingle around, please check out the food table. We don't want the pizza leftovers, so please take as much as you want. And just as a psychology club thing, we have started selling the stickers. So you'll see that poster board over there. There's 3 of them. They're $2 each. If you want to, just use that QR code that's there to place an order form. And there's ways to pay listed there as well. So we're going to be selling those for a while. But go ahead, you guys are free at free.